My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and for 27 years I believed that science was the only truth worth knowing. I was a cardiac surgeon at Royal London Hospital, published researcher department head. I had everything I thought I wanted, but I was dying inside and I didn't even know it. I grew up in a Christian household in Yorkshire, church on Sundays, prayers before meals, the whole thing. But by the time I finished medical school, I had stopped believing in anything I couldn't measure or prove. God became just another fairy tale I had outgrown. My faith died somewhere between anatomy class and my first surgery. My marriage fell apart when I was 38. My husband said I cared more about my patients than my own family. He wasn't wrong. My daughter barely spoke to me. I lived alone in a sterile flat, surrounded by medical journals and empty wine bottles. I told myself I was saving lives, that it was enough, but every night I went to bed feeling like I was suffocating. Then came that Tuesday in February. I was supposed to go home early, but my phone rang. Emergency surgery. 7-year-old boy, car accident, massive internal bleeding. When I walked into the trauma room, I saw this small child on the table, barely conscious, covered in blood and dust. But his eyes were open, and they were the calmest eyes I had ever seen on a patient. I leaned over him and said, "I'm Dr. Mitchell. I'm going to take care of you." And this little boy, with tubes going into his body and machines beeping around him, looked straight at me and whispered one word, Bismillah. I had no idea what it meant. I just knew I had a life to save. The surgery lasted 6 hours. Twice I thought we were going to lose him. His spleen was ruptured. There was bleeding near his liver, and his blood pressure kept dropping. But every time the monitors screamed and I thought it was over, somehow his vitals would stabilize. It was like something was pulling him back from the edge. At 4 in the morning, I walked out of that operating room and told his mother, "He's gonna make it." She was sitting on the floor in the hallway wearing a hijab with a small prayer rug beside her. She had been there for 6 hours. When I gave her the news, she didn't scream or cry. She just pressed her forehead to the ground and whispered something I couldn't understand. Then she stood up, looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Allah sent you to save my son. May he save you too." I nodded politely and went home. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. May he save you too. Save me from what? The boy's name was Yusuf. Over the next week, I checked on him every day during my rounds. His mother, Amira, was always there, reading from a small green book, and Yusuf never once complained, never cried for extra pain medication, never asked why this had happened to him. He just lay there, sometimes smiling, sometimes whispering words I kept hearing but couldn't understand. On the 4th day, I finally asked him, "Yusuf, that word you keep saying, what does it mean?" He smiled at me and said, "Alhamdulillah." It means thank God for everything. I almost laughed. You nearly died. You're in a hospital bed with tubes in your body. What exactly are you thankful for? This 7-year-old boy looked at me with those same calm eyes and said, "I'm thankful because you're here. And I'm still here, and my mama says that's not an accident. She says Allah puts people exactly where they need to be." That night, I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for an hour. I couldn't drive. I couldn't move. I kept thinking about what he had said. Allah puts people exactly where they need to be. I thought about my daughter, who I hadn't called in months. I thought about my empty flat. I thought about the fact that a child in a hospital bed had more peace than I had ever felt in my entire life. Something broke inside me that night. Not dramatically, just quietly, like a wall I had built around my heart finally cracking. The next morning, I walked into Yusuf's room and asked Amira a question I never thought I would ask. "That book you read every day, can you tell me what it says?" She didn't seem surprised. She just opened the Quran, found a page, and read aloud. "And it is He who created the heavens and earth in truth. And the day He says, 'Be,' and it is, His word is the truth." I stood there listening, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt something stir in my chest. Not skepticism, not analysis, just a recognition. Over the next month, I did something I had never done. I started reading about Islam. I bought an English translation of the Quran and read it the way I read everything, looking for flaws, inconsistencies, things that didn't make sense. But instead of flaws, I kept finding answers. Answers to questions I had carried for decades but never spoken aloud. Questions about why we're here, about suffering and about why someone can have everything the world offers and still feel completely empty. I read about Jesus in the Quran and I was stunned. I had grown up hearing about Jesus, but the Quran spoke of him with a reverence that took my breath away. A whole chapter named after Mary. Jesus described as a beloved prophet of God, born of a miracle, honored and cherished. I read about Tawhid, the oneness of God, and it hit me like a diagnosis I had been missing my entire life. One God, not three. Not a mystery that required a theology degree to understand. Just one. The simplicity of it made me close the book and stare at the ceiling. For the first time in decades, I prayed, not in a church, not with any formal words. I just sat on the edge of my bed, put my face in my hands, and said, "If you are real, if you are there, please guide me. I'm lost." 3 months later, I walked into a small mosque in East London. My hands were shaking. I was wearing my best dress because I didn't know what else to wear. The imam greeted me warmly and we sat together for 2 hours. I told him everything, the surgery, Yusuf, Amira, the Quran, the emptiness that had been eating me alive for years. The prayer on the edge of my bed. He listened without judgment, and when I finished, he asked me one simple question. "Do you believe there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger?" I paused, not because I was unsure, but because I understood the weight of what I was about to say. This wasn't just words. This was my entire life-changing direction. "Yes," I said, "I believe that with all my heart." And in that small room, with only a few witnesses, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, chief surgeon, woman of science, woman who had trusted only what she could see and touch, said the Shahada. "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." When I finished, I wept. I wept like I hadn't wept since I was a child. But for the first time in my life, the tears weren't from sadness or frustration or loneliness. They were from relief, from coming home to something I didn't even know I'd been searching for. 6 months later, I did something no one expected. I called my daughter. I told her everything. She didn't understand at first. How could she? But she heard something in my voice she hadn't heard in years. So, peace. I went back to the hospital, same hallways, same operating room, same scalpel in my hands. But everything had changed. Before every surgery now, I whispered the same word that a 7-year-old boy whispered to me on that cold February night. Bismillah. Not because it's a ritual, but because I finally understand what it means. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Every cut I make, every life I try to save, every breath I take, all of it is in his name now. And if you're watching this, if you feel that same emptiness I felt for so many years, know this. It's not an accident that you're here right now. Maybe this story found you for a reason. Maybe Allah puts people exactly where they need to be, just like a 7-year-old boy once told me in a hospital room. Maybe it's time to stop running from the truth you already know in your heart.